We're going over to the East Coast to a man that, from my point of view, I got into his stuff early. He's a renegade. He's a trailblazer. East Coast represent. Bronx represent. TNG J4F. Ovie inside the place.
AKA The Truth.
AKA The Truth. And that's something actually that plays really hard on your pieces, man. You really get into it. I mean, you're prolific at this, right?
Absolutely, man. I mean, when I did graffiti, man, it was a rebellious movement. And I did it more because I needed an identity for myself. And that was my therapy. That was my session to go to counseling, and that's why I did what I did, as I learned the history and as I made sure becoming a part of the culture.
Ovie, man, can I say your name? Listen, there's very few people that I could talk to on here, and I'm just like, yo, this is mad serendipity. I remember seeing you on GTV, import-only video. I felt like I was the only person in London that had it at the time. I'm sure there's others, but, these are like blueprints of American graph, East Coast particularly, that really, really captured my imagination at a young age. And, like, you were, to me, I was just like, yo, that's the guy. He getting up hard. You were doing it on video with zero fucks given. And it's just like, it's amazing that you're here, man. I just got to hand it to you off the bat, brother.
Thank you. I appreciate it, man. And and like I said, and that part of time, we're talking about, early to mid 90s. It was very rough, but it was a rebellious movement that I took with me and kept going with it. I mean, a lot of the things was you had a lot of how can I say? You had a lot of options whether to go forward with it or whether to back up and quit, because it was just a lot of things you had against you. You had other crews, that were very competitive, in a street physical way. So you had to try to, bypass that. You had authorities, that were constantly after you, and it was just a lot of situations that you had to go through. And what people don't understand back then is that we didn't have social media. So basically, it was so many writers, especially in the Bronx. Like, the Bronx was one of the most fiercest boroughs. Like, a lot of other boroughs, like you had Queens, Manhattan, Brooklyn. A lot of those writers, very few came into the Bronx because it was, a reckon to be messed with. And a lot of writers didn't want to come into the Bronx if you wasn't from the Bronx. So on top of that, you had to deal with that, right? Then there was so many writers, it was crowded. Like, you couldn't just go and hit an empty space because everything was bombed. So you had to go over people. And then what happened was, when you went over someone, then guess what? Then you had beef with their friends. And then that became a back and forth, wasting paint to claim a spot. And that's what it was back then to get up. Like, there was no room. You had to go over people. And hopefully that you had to keep coming back and claiming your spot. Because if they didn't wipe you out, or the other crews were going to wipe you out. And it was a constant battle. And that's how it was. It wasn't like now with the social media. You take a picture with it and then everyone sees it.
And this is the thing. With your generation of writer, it was almost like you've got the old school guys, up to about Cope. Then from there on in, there's no social media. It's almost like a dip in exposure outside of the boroughs that you're representing. And that's why I feel like it was really important to get you on. More so getting an understanding of the area in the 90s, getting an understanding of what, because people talk about how, destructive and how much how brutal the Bronx was,
and very territorial. Very territorial.
Really? Okay.
Very territorial.
Explain to me what the Bronx was like in the 90s.
Well, back then, there was a lot of abandoned buildings. You had the streets were running very well with crack. Crack was a big addiction, and then the heroin came in. So you had that going on. Certain neighborhoods you had to be careful because you strictly got robbed or possibly hurt bad or possibly even killed. Let me make an example where I grew up in Kingsbridge, where I grew up in Kingsbridge, and we had this crew called TNG, called it stands for the new generation, and they also called the 20 TNG 25 to life. The 25 to life was because the crew was so ruthless that they were willing to do 25 years in jail. So let me get back to TNG. So TNG was a crew that came from Kingsbridge, and that area, specifically in Kingsbridge, if they didn't know you, there was a street called Morris Avenue. It was between Morris all the way to University. So you had Morris, Jerome Avenue, you had Coughlin, Webb, and then Universe. No, you had Morris, Jerome, Davidson, University, Coughlin, Webb Avenue, and Sedgwick. So between Morris Avenue all the way to Sedgwick, if you wasn't from that area, because they all had that area, man, you was asking for trouble, and you was feeling. A lot of things went down, a lot of stabbing, a lot of killings, a lot of shooting, because TNG was the type of crew that they did their money, making their money, in the drug trade, robbing people, and late at night they will go out and bomb. They will go out and spray paint. That was their fun after they handle their business.
As a relative to the gang culture where they would paint, but they saw the graffiti as part.
Well, right, because it started because the graffiti played the street role of it, but then it's like back in those times, if you became a graffiti writer, three things happened. Either once the graffiti kicked in, then later on you would either turn into a hustler, meaning being a drug dealer, or you turned into criminal activities, or you got a straight job. And once you was 18, 19 years old, you left graffiti alone and you went about your business trying to live, the standard legit way.
What's the average statistic on that though, brother? What did you not more often see?
I saw people coming into the graph game and then, getting into criminal activities. Yeah. I mean, I was one of a few that made it out that, I just stood with the graffiti. Got a little into the hustle money at late, I would say late teens into my early 20s. And then, when I saw a lot of my friends getting killed, a lot of my friends going to jail for a long time, it just wasn't for me. I just didn't.
How old were you at that time though, bro? How old were you?
I would say it was between 19 up until 22, 23. When I found out the mother of my son was pregnant, and I had a legit job that my father had got me, that's when I just started looking at life differently. Stood with the graffiti. I didn't mind getting into trouble and going to jail for that because I knew that the time wouldn't hold weight. But at that time, at that specific time, I had to leave the legal, street criminal activity alone because I didn't want to spend the majority of my life in jail. That's not a life.